My name is Laura, and I'm 32 years old. I've been married to my husband, Nick, for 3 years. We're both the same age. We both work full-time, so we share the housework and manage to balance things pretty well. We don't have any kids yet, but we enjoy our life together. I work as a sales representative for a big company. It's a tough job, but I get paid well. Nick earns a bit less than I do. Even though Nick doesn't make as much money, I respect him because he loves his work and takes pride in it. Nick likes fishing as a hobby, so he's often away, but I understand he needs it to relax and take a break from work. We keep our savings separate, and I pay for all of our living expenses except for rent, which we split equally. I don't have any hobbies like Nick, but I enjoy seeing him happy with his. I'm fine with him spending money on his hobbies, while I focus on saving for our daily needs. The only thing that bothers me is Nick's mom, Wendy. We live very close to his parents, and since Wendy has trouble walking, Nick visits her often. That's fine with me, and I go with him when we don't have other plans. Today was our day off, so Nick asked me to go to his parents' house and bring a gift. It's been a long time, hasn't it? Wendy said, putting her hand on her cheek and sighing deeply. She said it had been a while, but we had just seen them last week. I thought to myself, she's probably saying that because Nick visited her alone last week, since I had to work on my day off for something urgent. I know you're busy, but before being an employee, you're my son's wife, right? Wendy said. I replied, yes. Wendy always talks to me like this. She doesn't like that I work so hard and earn more than Nick. She says things like, a woman should support her husband, it's wrong for a woman to work so hard, and that Nick feels embarrassed by how much I work. Oh, Mom, stop it. Laura and I already talked about this, Nick said, stepping in. Well, if you say so, then nothing can be done, Wendy replied. Nick usually has to stop his mom from criticizing me. I think Wendy, who has always been a stay-at-home mom, doesn't understand my feelings and will never agree with me working so hard. I'm really sorry, Nick always says on the way home. It's very stressful to be criticized by Wendy, but I try to deal with it because Nick always stands up for me and feels bad about it. When I checked the bank book after work, I noticed that this month's rent wasn't paid. That means I couldn't withdraw the money to pay for it. I asked Nick if he had forgotten to put the money into the account, since he usually does it after he gets paid. I don't have enough money this month again, he said. This had happened before. He probably bought something expensive and ran out of money, so he couldn't pay even half of the rent. When I sighed, Nick just laughed and tried to brush it off. Sorry, can you pay it this time? He said, as if it wasn't a big deal. I could understand if it only happened once or twice. I know sometimes he wants to buy something expensive, but this happened last month too. Well, a limited edition fishing rod just came out, he said. You said the same thing last month, though, I replied. If you really wanted it, why didn't you at least talk to me first? Even though we keep our accounts separate, if he can't even pay his share of the rent, that's a problem. Nick is supposed to pay half of the rent, but if he can't, I have to cover the whole thing, plus all the living expenses. I can't do that on my own. Ugh, stop nagging me, he interrupted as I tried to explain, sighing like it was no big deal. Nagging? I said, surprised. I get that this happens sometimes, but we agreed to pay the rent together. I was starting to worry about how he spent his money, but I hadn't said anything before. If anything comes up, you just talk about money, aren't you too obsessed with it, Laura? Nick said. I was shocked. How can you say that? We can't stay here if we don't pay the rent, right? Talking about money all the time is disgraceful, he replied. What, disgraceful? That's what Nick said to me. Why would he say that? I knew Nick didn't care much about money, and that was one of the things I liked about him, so even though he didn't save a lot, I thought it was okay if I saved the money and took care of the family finances. But to him, that was disgraceful. When I didn't say anything, Nick probably thought I couldn't argue back, so he sighed and said, I knew you were like this, but like my mom says, women should stay at home and support their husbands. What? If you don't support me as your husband, you'll be the one embarrassed later, he added, looking at his phone. I didn't know what to say. Nick always apologized and said his mom's views were old-fashioned and that she didn't understand me, but in the end, it all came back to her idea. What does Nick mean by supporting him as my husband? Does it mean I should silently manage the family finances? I came home late one day from work. Welcome home, Nick greeted me. Wait, what? Wendy's here? I didn't know she was coming over, I said, surprised. She took my bag and walked into the living room. I was shocked when I saw it. What's going on? The living room was full of cardboard boxes and packages that weren't there this morning. It was so crowded I could barely move. Not only was my mother-in-law there, but my father-in-law too. Nick was just sitting there, watching TV and drinking beer, laughing. Hey, what's happening? I asked. Don't talk so loud, Nick frowned. My mom and dad moved in today, he said. They moved in with us? I didn't hear anything about them moving in. You didn't mention anything this morning, I said, confused. My mother-in-law was unpacking her things with no care, smiling like everything was fine. Hey, I didn't hear about this, I said again. Mom can't walk very well anymore. She can still walk a little, but it's hard for her to live on her own, Nick explained. But we have an extra room, so it's fine, he added. I thought it would be better for you to live with Mom, so it won't be a burden on you. I'll help with the housework, and it'll be easier for you since you're always busy with work. It felt like they didn't care about me at all anymore. I told Nick I didn't want to live with his parents, but he didn't seem to listen. Seeing him act like this made me want to cry. We had gone through the trouble of renting a bigger house because we wanted space for a baby in the future, but I never imagined our family would grow like this. Living with Nick's parents felt terrible. They took over the room I had planned for a future baby, and it felt like they owned the house. My favorite sofa and dining table were no longer available to me. They told me that as the wife, I was supposed to do all the chores and not even sit down. The only time I could sit was when everyone was asleep, and I was alone. Eating leftovers by myself every day made me want to cry. What am I doing? How did this happen? My in-laws never paid for anything. When I asked them for help with money, they said, "You make a lot of money, but you're too stingy. Are you trying to take our pension money?" And they would yell at me. When I talked to Nick about it, he just looked disappointed. It's fine, it's just money. Mom is doing the housework, so they're helping you, right? He said. But in the end, Wendy would complain about how her feet and legs hurt from cleaning, cooking, and washing dishes, so I ended up doing it all. She did the laundry, but I didn't want to mix my clothes with theirs. In the end, I did all the laundry by myself. Since Nick's parents moved in, there were more people in the house, which meant more chores and more financial stress. I complained about it, but no one listened. Instead, they yelled at me, saying they didn't think I was such a cold person. What the heck? If you have a problem, leave. Nick, who used to support me, wasn't the husband I loved anymore. I realized I couldn't be happy living with these people anymore. Day after day, I was blamed for everything. Meals were wasted, and my personal belongings would disappear or end up in the trash. I became numb to it all. Then, there was the issue with the living expenses. You're still talking about that? You make a lot of money, so just handle it, they'd say. But my credit card was being used without my permission. Was this Wendy's doing? I only borrowed a little. I'll pay you back later. Wendy snickered when I showed her the credit card statement. I was shocked to see nearly $5,000 spent in 1 month. Wendy admitted she used my credit card, and I found many branded items in her room that she clearly bought using it. Nick knew about this, but didn't say anything. He stopped helping with the chores we used to share, and now he didn't even want to look at me. But I wasn't going to let this go on forever. That was enough. The next day, after I spoke to my lawyer, I took a paid leave from work. I left the house, but returned with movers and their truck. What about work? Wendy, who was alone at home when I returned, asked, confused. She saw the movers behind me and looked puzzled. Excuse me, we might be a bit noisy, I said, ignoring her. I told the movers to start. Huh? Who are these people? Wendy asked. Well, please get started, I told the movers, walking past Wendy, who was shocked at what was happening. I led them to my room. Please take everything out, I said. They quickly packed up my things and started carrying them out. I felt relieved as I watched them. I wished I had left earlier. This hell could have ended sooner. Hey, what are you doing? I won't let you get away with this, Wendy yelled, but I ignored her. She started calling someone, probably Nick or my father-in-law. I didn't care who she called. I knew it would all be over before they arrived. Wendy kept complaining, but she couldn't stop the movers. Oh, sorry, this is the last one, I said. After most of my things were moved out, I turned to Wendy, who was still complaining. I'm leaving. Huh? Can you give this to Nick for me? I asked, holding out an envelope. Just then, the front door opened. Nick had rushed back in. As I expected, Nick returned after the movers finished their work. They had packed everything up in just half an hour. What the hell? Nick said, staring at the empty room, then glaring at me. Nick rushed in, looking angry. What the hell do you think you're doing? I smiled and handed him the envelope, ignoring his angry expression. He was shocked when he saw what was inside. Divorce papers. What? Nick said, surprised. Wendy came running over to see what was in Nick's hand. What are you doing? How dare you give my son divorce papers? It's time for a divorce, let's end this, I said calmly. You need to be grateful to Nick for marrying you, and it's your job to serve him and his family. The movers, who had been quietly waiting, looked surprised at Wendy's rude comments. I realized then that her behavior was out of line. I'm not wrong, this isn't normal. You told me to leave if I had a problem, didn't you? I said to Nick, who was stunned. I didn't think you'd actually leave, he stammered, probably shocked that I had the courage to do it. Well, I've had enough, and now I'm leaving, I said, turning and walking out with the movers. I apologized to the movers for the commotion, but they were supportive. They said they knew what had been going on and comforted me. I felt a mix of fear, sadness, and relief, but I was proud of myself for leaving. Afterwards, I officially filed for divorce through my lawyer. I had been preparing for this moment. I consulted a lawyer and gathered evidence of all the reasons I wanted a divorce, including all the complaints and criticisms from Wendy and Nick, as well as the personal belongings they had thrown away. My lawyer said I had enough evidence, so we moved forward. I had already signed a lease for my new place, and all that was left was to move my things. I smiled at the thought of starting fresh. Even though I had to leave behind some of my favorite furniture, it felt exciting to finally live on my own terms. Nick and Wendy were not happy about the divorce. Nick even stormed into my lawyer's office asking for my whereabouts. He also tried waiting for me at work, but with the help of my colleagues, I was able to avoid them. The things Nick and his parents had done were terrible, and my lawyer said that if it went to court, we would definitely win. Nick didn't want a trial because it would cost him more money, so he reluctantly agreed to the divorce. I also demanded that Wendy pay me back for using my credit card without permission, along with alimony. Wendy fought back at first, but when I threatened to report her to the police, she backed down. Wendy kept saying, "We're family," but I realized she only meant her own little family, her, Nick, and her husband. She had forgotten about me. I felt disgusted every time she used the word family to try and manipulate me. After the divorce was final, Nick and his parents moved away. The neighborhood didn't want them around after all the drama, and Nick couldn't afford the rent without me. They moved to a small house in a rural area, and Nick now had to live on his small salary and his parents' pension. Nick tried to contact me many times, texting, "We're struggling, please come home," but I blocked his messages. As for me, I'm finally happy. I live in a place filled with things I love and work at a job I enjoy. I don't have to worry about people invading my privacy or always complaining about me. Life is much more comfortable now. There's a colleague at work who I'm interested in. We're both busy, but he's kind and understands that I need time to trust him. He's patient and says he'll wait. We support each other and are independent, and I'm excited to see where this relationship can go. I'm ready to live a happy life with someone who respects me.